Oh, yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast, the People's Podcast, Players Podcast, Prognosticators Podcast, Pedialyte Podcast, Pampers Podcast, and baby, we are back. It is a new Philadelphia Flyers season. They start out with a bang, a big old win against those nasty New Jersey Devils. We got positivity. Welcome into the Positivity Podcast this week. That's right, we're talking hockey. We're breaking down hockey. We're talking about the first game of the season. I'm Russ Joy at Joy on Broad, joined right now by my dear friend, colleague, and a man who is ready to bring some positivity himself, and that, of course, is Chris Terrian Bundy. Follow him on Twitter at CTerrian6. How are you doing, you beaut?
I'm doing great, Russ. I mean, it's a great time to be a Philly sports fan, right? In general, I mean, you got the Eagles rolling. You bring Dallas in on Sunday night. Phillies with the first home playoff game in several years coming up this weekend as well. A couple of them, and then you got the Flyers there. You know what? They have the same record right now as everyone else in tops of the league. So, you know what? It's a great start. It was a great start to you. A lot of good things happened last night. A lot of guys really played well. I know it's been a summer of malcontent in Philly over what they perceive on this team and what they see. But and again, I'm not going to go on it. No one's winning the Stanley Cup here, and I think people understand that. But you know, you have to build and you have to find out what you got from some of your young guys, some of your older guys. And I thought last night was you got a little bit of a myriad of everything last night, Russ, to be quite honest with you. You know, I saw guys play better than maybe they had in 2 or 3 years. Provorov was a guy, had a good, solid game from the parts I've seen. You'll understand what I mean, the parts I've seen when we get into that shortly. Of course, the game was on ESPN Plus last night. And as I tweeted, I watched ESPN Plus for my daughter's basketball games, not for NHL hockey. But anyway, that's the wave of the future, and people will have to adjust to it. And if you tell them anything differently, they get really upset with you about it, and they start telling you, adjust to the times and all that. But it was a good night. I have nothing bad to say about anything last night. I thought it was pretty cool. They brought in Rob Thompson to bang the bell at the beginning of their, or whatever that thing is. The big old drum. The drum. Yeah, I hate that thing, but nice, it was a good touch. Yeah, no one's ever heard of that. Like, I don't know who created that. But anyway, it was good. I mean, they brought him in. It got the building electric. It would look like a late arriving crowd. But to their credit, they had a lot of people there. It did arrive late. It looked like a pretty good crowd for opening night, and the result that everybody wanted. Put a lot of the negativity of what was perceived in the summer through the GM's office, personnel issues in every facet. Organizational disruptions that have gone on for far too long. It was really, really nice to just talk about hockey right now and talk about a good team win on opening night. That is why I came here, was to talk about hockey, not to turn this into the fucking National Enquirer of the Philadelphia Flyers, but they've done that themselves. I just happen to get caught up in the river, the streaming river of that over the course of the year. But it was great, Russ. What'd you think? I mean, I listen. I know we were texting Anthony yesterday and before the game, and he said the crowd seemed good. I got some pictures people sent from the game. It looked like a lot of fun. And again, seeing Connectney and Frost step up, those are the two guys, the goal scorers that you think you're going to rely on. And I know we'll talk about Frost, but he's a guy that I mentioned to you a couple of days ago. I'd forgotten the last podcast. I have high hopes for Morgan Frost. I'm a Morgan Frost fan, and I think there's something there, and we saw a little bit of it last night.
And, before we move on, I want to point out, because there were a lot of people last week, Bundy, who love you, and some who might not, but who listened to the show and they were like, somebody's got to fix Bundy's mic. This is a problem,
I agree.
So Bundy's back this week in his home office with his microphone, as you've noticed.
But see this little baby right here?
I love it. We can't give the listeners too many good things, though, because now I add to the show Anthony Sanfilippo, who you can find on Twitter at AntSanPhilly, who is I think he's in Delco right now. For those who are watching on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel, you can see part of Anthony's steering wheel. That, of course, is because Anthony, a sellout, is now going down to cover the Philadelphia Phillies in their first playoff game in 11 years. I know he's very excited. He was at the game last night, so we obviously want to, pick his brain on, how last night's game was, with the feeling in the arena and everything. But I'm going to do my darndest here to make sure that I mute in and out so that we don't get complaints about the sound of the Delco roads. But Anthony, since you're here and since I don't have you muted, let me ask you right off the bat. Bundy mentioned the fact that it felt like a late arriving crowd, but then it ended up being a relatively substantial crowd from what we could tell on the telecast and from pictures in the arena, did it kind of exceed expectations? It would appear that it might have.
Yeah, it certainly did, guys. And it wasn't that it necessarily was a late arriving crowd, Bundy. I made note of this in the story I wrote today for Crossing Broad. The fans didn't react to the pregame introductions with other than a few exceptions, right? I mean, Torts got a really big applause. Guys like Couturier got a big applause. Atkinson, even though they were both injured, but they were introduced and got a big applause. Some of the Carter Hart, some of the players that were in the game got big applause. But for a lot of guys, it was just silence or polite golf claps. And it's almost like they were sending a message saying, yeah, we're still here. We're here, but we're not, gonna let you know that we're here, positively, unless you give us something positive to cheer about. And then the team went out and did. I mean, they went out and gave them a pretty strong game. The one thing I was a little disappointed in the fans was the flat out booing of Ryan Ellis when they introduced Ellis. I get it. I understand the frustration, but guy's got a career-threatening injury. And whether you think it happened before he got here, after he got here, whatever the case might have been, the guy doesn't want to not play hockey, right? I mean, he wants to play. So to sit there and boo him for being off the ice with an injury, I think that was a little misguided on the fan base's part. But team-wise, I thought that they played a pretty strong game overall. Two things I want to point out and get you guys to kind of talk about. I think Bundy, you might have mentioned it already, but Provorov D'Angelo looked really good. I mean, that might have been Provorov's best game in 3 years.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah.
Yeah. He had 2 assists. He blocked 10 shots in one game.
Honestly,
Ivan Provorov.
It was 28 overall, right? 28 for the team overall.
Yeah,
to 9, 10. I believe, for the Devils. It's insane. Almost a third.
He led the team in hits. He blocked a shot that was going to go into the net. That was Hart was a little out of position. He made a skate save. Provorov was all over the place. He was sensational. And D'Angelo looked good next to him too. So I mean, the two of them played really well together. That was one thing I wanted to note. I mean, I know you guys talked about the guys who scored. Obviously, it's important. Connectney got 2 goals. Frost got 2 goals, although one was an empty netter own goal by the Devils. So that was a cheapie. But the other thing I wanted to mention was I thought it was really curious that of all the players that were on the ice, only one had a letter on their sweater.
Scotty Laughton.
That was Scott Laughton was an A. There was no other A's. No Provorov, no Hayes, no one else had a letter except Scott Laughton. And I felt like he came out in the first period. He did take that one stupid penalty, which he admitted after the game. I got a chance to talk to Scotty one-on-one, which is the crux of my story that's on Crossing Broad today. But I got the sense that Tortorella wanted him to be the guy to kind of set the tempo for the game, to play a little bit with a little bit of what I call piss and vinegar, and really kind of get that going. And I asked both of them about it after the game, and Tortorella said, "Yeah, I want an identity for this team, and I know what I want it to look like, and that's part of it." And so I really found that interesting because Laughton was in the middle of several pushing and shoving scrums with the Devils. There were no fights, but it was a little bit nasty, especially in the first period. And Scotty was in the middle of it every time. Really kind of shows you the kind of player he is as a leader, and that Tortorella really trusts him, I think, more than anyone else up front. I mean, maybe Atkinson, who knows, because he's out. But maybe trusts him more than anyone else up front to kind of be that guy to lead the team.
So, yeah. Bundy, we made a big deal out of this in the offseason because it was one of those episodes that we asked for fan feedback. And one of the most common questions was, who's going to be the captain? Does the team go the whole season without a captain? We talked about this at length. It's interesting in that, Laughton is a third-line guy. On a good team, Laughton's a third-line guy. Was much higher in the lineup last night. We've seen him in the past, break into the top 6 when the team has struggled. So it's not as if he hasn't done it before. But he's not a guy that you think of as a top line player. And a lot of times, I think, at least in this city, when you think of the guy who gets the C, in most cases, it's your most talented player. That doesn't necessarily mean that it should be, but it's kind of the way that it's been in many seasons. Maybe not the Jason Smith season, but still. When you saw Laughton take the ice as the only guy with a letter on his sweater, was that a moment where you said to yourself, you know what? It's because he's the only one who's made an impression? Or is that something where you think this might be indicative of the fact that Atkinson might get an A, Couturier might still be in line for the C? It's just that, they're not healthy right now. And, why put a letter on another guy's sweater that you might not want to roll with the rest of the year?
Because you could put, there's 3 A's you can have in a game, right? Listen, Torts is also a master of communicating without saying a word. When you make a move like that, you're putting everybody on notice, especially Kevin Hayes, right? Like Kevin Hayes is the elder statesman, the highest paid forward right now, I guess, guys, with everyone else out of the lineup. Yeah. So by not giving him an A, you're already kind of telling him without saying, unless you've had a meeting, like, I don't think you're ready. Or I don't want you in that role. So with a guy like Laughton, I think you kind of hit it a little bit, Russ. Yeah, the guys that were available last night to Torts in game number 1 of the year were the ones to him that he saw in training camp that actually warranted an A. It was a message, believe me. The fact that there was no C last night in the lineup, but there was 1 A when you could have had 3, or put someone, give someone like a guy like Provorov. Maybe Provorov gets an A if he keeps playing like that. But I think that was an initial night thing, I think, where they just said, you know what? Laughton's a guy who's been here. He's earned it, and he's a guy to me that looks like the leader. But boy, I'll tell you one thing, man, the whispers and some of the stuff that goes through the room with that, it talks. People will talk about it amongst themselves, or they'll think about it in their own head. I promise you that much. So I kind of like the move, but I also admire Scott. Scotty Laughton was one of my favorite guys there. When I played, I loved him. As a broadcaster, I had him. Terrific for me, and a great guy. And I know what he's like on the ice. He's not out patting guys on the pads between whistles and, hey, how was your summer on the other team? No, he's going to go out and he's going to be a distraction and a pain in the ass. The problem is he's not going to get you 90 points, right, as a captain. So
is that a big deal though? But Bundy, like honestly, is that a big deal though? I mean, and I'll throw it to you here in a sec. But like, Bundy, is it a huge deal if the captain isn't that major point producer? Or if you have a thought on it, go ahead.
I think on a major league elite team, I'll give it to Anthony. I'll just go for a few seconds. I think when you have a super studded team, your best player is a captain. Usually that just kind of works itself out. This is a team in such transition that you're trying to find anything positive right now in the form of leadership, because it's been so bad for a long time now. So Torts is trying to take the guys that he likes, implement what he's thinking onto that viewpoint, and then let the player run with it, but also has a little bit of his own personality as well, and Laughton does have that. He fits the bill. But yeah, most of the time, a Colorado Avalanche, a Tampa Bay Lightning, you're going to see their top players, Stamkos first overall, even Colorado, it's the Swede part.
Landeskog.
Landeskog, he was a 19-year-old captain, right? McKinnon didn't even exist then, but that's the way it is, and it's worked. But that's how, and I think that's how it goes, Russ. Go ahead, Anthony. Sorry.
No problem. So it's interesting that you guys are talking about this, because I also brought this up in the story today. Bunny, I want to take you back to your era when Torts had his first team in Tampa Bay. Now, I'm not comparing Scott Laughton career-wise to Dave Andreychuk, because Dave Andreychuk was a talented offensive player in the late 80s and early 90s. But over the last 8 seasons of his career was a third liner. It was just kind of, a veteran third line guy, good depth player to have on your team. And that's who Torts had as his captain when they won the Stanley Cup. Not LeCavalier, not San Luis, not anybody else. And they had a really good team, a really talented team in Tampa that year. But Andreychuk was the captain, and not just for that season, for a couple of seasons prior.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder if Torts is like kind of looking back at that and saying, if we're going to build this team from the ashes back up, is that the kind of leader that I want out there because he will definitely be a lead by example player, and he's pretty vocal in the room. I mean, he's a pretty vocal guy. He's a respected guy, second longest tenured player behind Couturier in Philly. So maybe that there's a lot. Believe it or not, Scott Laughton, he's 28 years old. This is his 10th NHL season, right? I mean, it's amazing to think that he's been in the league that long. But I mean, there's a time you get to that point, maybe Torts is looking at it and saying, okay, he's not going to be a 90-point player like Andrew Chuck was in the early 90s with the Devils, whatever. That was a different era too. He's more like the Andrew Chuck that was 32, 33 years old later, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when he would score 35 to 40 points in a season, but was still considered a really good captain.
Yeah. And one thing too with Scotty, right, Anthony, we've seen it before too. He's a guy, and again, one of my favorites, and I've been guilty of it as well. He does disappear for spurts as well. He has in the past, where you're watching for 20 games, you're like, did Scotty Laughton played? Not that he's been bad, but he's just not at the forefront of every conversation. Last night he was, and I think that's why Tort saw something in him, guys, to elevate him into that sole leadership role. If essentially right now, if you're asked John Tortorella, who's the leader of your team, it's Scotty Laughton. Right now, he's the only guy that wore a letter last night in that game. That's top of the food chain on the ice right now, and they won the game 5-2. Good start.
So, Bundy, if we go back to the offseason, he was one of the guys that we had talked about as being a potential candidate for the captaincy. Is there a path here? Say Couturier's at another few games. Is there a path to Laughton getting named the captain this season? Like, could we be a month away of him being like this on ice leader, and Tortorella maybe says, you know what, like, this guy's done so much, not only through camp, not only through off-season workouts, he's demonstrated it on the ice and in games, and you know what, like, we're taking that A, we're popping a C on the sweater. Like, is there a chance?
Yeah. Well, you know what, he's gonna, and I think Anthony will see this as well too. But he's gonna have to do it for more than 5 or 8 games. He's probably gonna have to do it for 40. I mean, if he's doing that for 40 games, and all of a sudden this team, which we can get to after, I'm not taking last night's win and trying to spin it into this grandiose thing. It was a good win over a not
Another
really
bad team.
that much improved Devils team. To be honest with you, I thought there'd be more there. There wasn't. But it has to start somewhere. Maybe 40 games, and then he gets a look at Couturier and Atkinson. I don't think you can make that move, Anthony, without having a fair shake at Coots, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think he'll do anything before you give Sean Couturier at least a year. So, Russ, to answer your question and just silence the everything, I do not think there will be a captain on this team this year. I do not believe that.
I agree with Bundy. Yeah.
And so if that's the case, do we assume that Couturier will probably get an A, and then maybe Atkinson gets the other A when they're both back and healthy, or we can at least probably.
Or if Provorov might only have to play like that for 20 or 30 games and then find himself back on it. Also, it's funny, how guys pick it up too. Sanheim signs his contract before the game. I guarantee you, Provorov's like, man, you know what? He's not making more than me now. I got to go have a great game. Sometimes guys think of that stuff too in and of the spot. So, listen, whatever the hell he ate or did before the game yesterday, Provorov needs to keep that going. And if the John Tortorella effect is indeed working for him, which it hadn't the last 2 or 3 years, then so be it. They got a lot of money wrapped up in 3 defensemen, and he's one of them, and he needs to play, and he needs to be better.
We talked about it last.
I forgot about the Angelo now. So, yeah.
Last week we talked about Cam York and about how you and I weren't exactly in agreement, but there was one thread here that I think kind of ties these two things together. The idea of sending a kid down to see how he reacts. And I don't know how much I think that's a thing now. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But for a vet and for a guy who has had a letter on his sweater in the past, to not have it, as you said, it does send a big message. I'm sure that we've all heard similar things about certain guys in this locker room that have been here for multiple years. There are certain, what's the nice way to put this? Like there are certain elements to each of these guys away from the ice, and maybe even on it that it raises an eyebrow from time to time, and you kind of wonder if maybe a letter was given to a guy too soon. You wonder if it maybe goes to their head. I'm not saying that's what happened here with Provorov, having it in the past, but it certainly, at least through one game, looks like the message was received. And rather than recoiling and kind of, curling into the fetal position, he came out and he played like a bat out of hell. Let's twist this a little bit. Let's, play the spin game here a bit. A lot of people were upset about Tony DeAngelo being brought in the offseason. And some say, who cares? I just care about the team on the ice. I only care about the on-ice product. I don't give a shit about any of the other stuff. I don't care for somebody, some people, it's the total opposite. They genuinely care about all the things that have been said, all the things that have been done, et cetera, et cetera. DeAngelo looks like a guy who conceptually should play well with Provorov and could potentially stabilize Provorov the best that anybody's done since Niskanen. And maybe you can say that DeAngelo's dynamicness on the offensive end is kind of like an upgraded version of what they had hoped they would get out of like a Shane Gostisbehere pairing with Provorov. I know one game is just a very small sample size, but are you guys encouraged by DeAngelo's play and what it presumably has done, at least in the early going, for getting Provorov to bounce back? I'm going to throw it to Ant first, who was, down there checking this game out.
Well, it was interesting because we talked a little bit about that last night, and the one thing, and Bundy can probably address this even better, watching it, they made a lot of small little plays that you don't really notice, right? But like little passes here and there that I felt were really good as far as breaking out of the zone. And Tony, like the one thing about him, he was the one guy, and Torts mentioned this too in conversation, said the one thing that he was not happy with last night was the team really is still gun shy about going up the middle of the ice, but that Tony has no problem with it. He says he's going to go, he's going to gamble a little bit.
There we go. There's our first cutout of the episode. We'll get back to Ant in a second. Oh wait, I think he's back. I don't know if his sound is back. We'll see here. I don't think he's got sound right now. Maybe we'll.
No, but I'll pick up from where he's at though.
Go ahead, Bundy.
And if we hear him, he could jump on. But I know what he's talking about, getting into the middle of the ice. If you can play a 200-foot game between the hash marks, and make, that's where life becomes miserable in the other team. And that's why a guy like, I'm just thinking even forwards, like DeAngelo does, middle of ice is fine. I'll let Anthony pick it back up, but that's what he's saying. It makes life on the other team harder when you can play between the hash marks.
Right, and that's the thing. Like he said, Torts said, look, he's going to make a couple mistakes going up the middle. They're going to end up in the back of our net. He said, but I'd rather that over the course of a year than just not going there, because we'll never generate any offense if we're keeping everything to the outside. Right. So he said it's going up the middle is where you pressure the other team, and Tony's not afraid to go there. So you have that combination of those two together. Yeah, I think it can work. I'm a little surprised because, again, one game against the Devils, who are not the greatest, but at the same time, I liked what I saw for one game.
Last night, I agree with you. I just don't know. Like, to me, it's a pair that you almost. Like, for example, Gostisbehere and Provorov were awful together.
Right.
Like,
they had a good run early, and then it all fell apart. I think it was like a 20-game stretch when they initially were paired up that was good. And then it was bad, and they got broken up.
And you couldn't put them together after a while.
Yeah.
You literally couldn't. So you said something interesting, like DeAngelo stabilizing Provorov. First of all, I don't think DeAngelo's ever stabilized anybody. He's not a stabilizing type of player. He's erratic and eccentric and different, like making plays up the middle, making kind of quirky, crazy offensive plays sometimes. That can be annoying to play with, like when you're a guy. So for Provorov, you also don't want him trying to read what mistake might happen in the zone with DeAngelo. DeAngelo's got a long way to go, guys, just so you know, to prove to people, not just us or me, but are also around the league, that he can actually play in his own zone. That's been the book out on him is worthy struggle in his own zone. His level of getting stick down, body position. And that's, most people have hampered on. I'm sure if you asked Brendan Moore, that's what he would have liked to see more of last year. But it was last year with Jacob Slavin who stabilized D'Angelo. So I'm wondering if it's the other way around almost, where Provorov is kind of the guy who is it can be a calming type presence, getting the puck out, penalty killing, he plays in every situation. Maybe that's a guy. Maybe it's just so messy that it actually does work out somehow.
Could be. Hey, we entered the season seeing Zamula and Adard both on the opening night roster. There has been a move made today on Friday. Adard sent down to the Phantoms. Jackson Cates recalled could be related to the injury to Owen Tippett. That remains to be seen. I don't think they've made an actual announcement about anything in terms of an update on Tippett's status. At this point, we look back, we say that like, hey, the top four was solidified prior to the season. Then you see a guy like Travis Sanheim, who I think like at different points over the last few years, we've said like in stretches has been the team's best defenseman, for better or worse. He signs an 8-year contract. Let's get to that really quick. So Sanheim decides to sign this long-term deal, more than $6 million per year. This comes after Ristolainen was extended a few months ago. Apparently Ristolainen and Sanheim liked playing together. Now they're both locked up here for multiple years. What was your initial reaction? I guess I'll start with Ant. Your initial reaction to that deal. It is a big contract, and it kind of goes without saying, but another big money deal for a long term issued by a potentially lame duck GM. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by the term. I'm not surprised by the money. I mean, when you really look at it, we keep talking about this, about, okay, your number 3 or number 4 defensemen are making around 5.5. So your number 3 defensemen are going to probably make around 6. So he got 6.2 per year over 8 years, that's the thing that was a little bit of a surprise to me, because you've really now locked in 3 defensemen long term. I mean, D'Angelo's only 2 years, but if he ends up being what you think he's going to be, you're probably going to try and sign him beyond that. And of course, he's going to want to play here because it's his hometown. And if he's successful, that'll be a reason to stay. So you really made a commitment to your defense here. I mean, all told, you've signed these top 4 guys for $131 million. An average of 23. I think next year you're paying $23 million to your top 4 defensemen, none of which have ever made an all-star team. So it's kind of a curious way of looking at it, a curious approach. But at the same time, there's a potential for it to work. So in other words, this could either be really smart or it could be a total disaster. I don't think that there's a middle ground, right? I think that it ends up either working out really well. Sanheim becomes a player that is very reliable, that he could be here for those 8 years, and you love having him on the roster. If that's the case, by years 5, 6, 7, 8 at $6.25 million, he's a bargain, right? On those back end. Or this doesn't work out. The Sanheim-Ristolainen pair ends up being sporadic and erratic, and you have to move on eventually from one of these guys or try and trade somebody. Now you got to try and move a contract, and then it ends up being a disaster, right? So I don't think that there's an okay middle ground. I think they swung for the fence, and they hope that they hope the wind's blowing out, and that's really what it is with this. So it could work, but it could also just as easily blow up in their face.
One of those guys is going to get moved eventually. So it's Ristolainen or somebody. I mean, it's almost impossible to keep that kind of salary like with 3 guys, and that's the one problem I have is like there's no. These would be the kind of money. If it was 2010 all over again, this is what you'd be paying Duncan Keith and Brendan and Seabrook in Chicago.
Right.
Like, seriously, that's what they just paid guys that had already won like 2 Stanley Cups, this kind of money. So that's the only issue I have, and the term is too long, way too long. I only look at the first 4 years of the deal, and that's it. And I agree with Anthony. The money, that's what the money is now. Even though if I were his agent, I might have told him to hold out a little bit more. They're paying guys like, Seth Jones $9 million, and that's what those numbers are going crazily up. So actually, from that standpoint, money-wise, it's probably not a bad deal. Term's too long.
I see, and like I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, guys, but like I kind of disagree with Ant's premise of like black and white on this one, that it's either going to be great or horrible. Like I feel like Ristolainen was much more likely to go one way or the other. I feel like the likely scenario here is that like the Sanheim deal is like middle of the road to good. I don't think that he's going to fall off. Like I think that he's like he's demonstrated over enough time here, enough growth as a player, and enough consistency as a player that he's not going to be like a bottom out. Ristolainen, there's just so much variance in his play, and it can be so erratic that like I think there was like a reason that people were justified to feel one way or the other about that contract. But like as a youngish defenseman, I think Sanheim's fine. The thing that I think kind of maybe skews things a bit, and probably in the Flyers' favor, in fairness, I agree that the term is long. The AAV is not that bad because, as we talked about back in the Ristolainen, deal, the cap's going to go up, and in 3 years, what it's going to take to have a second paired defenseman, I mean, this is going to be a bargain. I mean, unless his play totally falls off, he sustains some kind of horrific injury or something. Like I think Sanheim's actually going to the value on this deal is actually okay. The 8 years is kind of crazy, but it's the GM who gives all kinds of stuff. By the way, we mentioned at the top of the show, Frost gets 2 goals. One's an empty netter. Bundy, I know that you didn't get to see the entire game for something that we'll talk about here in a second.
What a joke that
was. Frost is a guy who has had confidence issues in the past. As a guy who hasn't maybe lived up to the billing that I think maybe was unfairly put on him. How big can it be for a young player who's looking to get his feet under him the right way with a new coach to go out and pot one goal that we could say like, hey, that was legit, and a second one that's kind of like a nice little confidence boost? Like, could this finally be the thing that puts Morgan Frost on the right path?
Yeah, I've been a Morgan Frost fan since he came in, and I just saw a little the way he can handle tight spaces down low. He got that shot off quick on the first goal that he got in the game, an empty netter later. But it's amazing. Sometimes a guy's first game in a year can really set the tone for himself. And I think that there's a little bit. I think they're going to find offense with Morgan Frost that they're going to be surprised at. And I'll be honest with you guys, if I were coaching this team or the manager of it 3 years ago, I would have said, play this guy, play him in every situation. When he first came up his first game, remember I think he had a couple points there. He played with Giroux. He did a nice little slip around. It was in Carolina. I remember. I have crazy memory for games like that, but I do remember him playing in it, and he got a nice goal, made a nice little assist as well. And you know what? And I thought, I'm like, okay, this guy's a good junior player. You know what? Just give him a chance to play. And I think finally they're going to just kind of lay off him here and give him that opportunity. But I think they're going to be surprised. I really do think there's something there with him that he's going to find an offensive flair and be an offensive producer in this league. I go back a long, long time ago, and I said, I remember when Giroux came in, I saw him play for 10 games. I said, went on Glenn Macnow's show, I said, this guy's going to be a top 5 player in the league within couple of years. And he was. He ended up being that. And I don't want to go that far to say Morgan Frost is going to be that player in Giroux, but he's going to be good. I really think he's going to be good if Torts kind of, lays off him a little bit, lets him play, understands there's going to be mistakes, but, understanding as well that this is a team that doesn't have a lot of offense. It really does not. It scored some goals last night, but they're going to need him, and they're going to need like a guy like Connectney scoring goals as well. But to me, Frost is the most intriguing forward on this hockey team from an offensive standpoint, because I really do believe there's something there.
You just touched on 2 things, and what a perfect segue. Look at you. You mentioned the guy by name, but you also mentioned the not being afraid to make mistakes. And so that leads us to a friend of the program, Travis Connectney, who has caught fans' ire over the past few years for not taking that next step, chirps a lot, disappears for long stretches of the season. The message that he seemed to come out with when Emily Kaplan interviewed him at the end of the game, the clip that the team shared when he got the Phillies jersey, like the Flyers Phillies jersey with the bat, was, we're going to make mistakes. They're going to happen. It's how you bounce back from them. It's how you react to them. It seems like that is something that a player like Connectney wouldn't be saying publicly unless it had kind of been instilled and maybe that bar and that expectation were set by the head coach. It almost makes me feel like they're going to give Morgan Frost an opportunity, that they're not going to try to shelter him and that they're not going to dissuade him from making those kind of elite level plays that I think a lot of people expected of him when he got to this level. And, when you've had the chance, I guess, to interact with Tortorella and some of these guys and last night, when you look at it, do you feel like this is maybe the most advantageous position for young players if the coach is in fact, kind of harping on them that, mistakes are going to happen, but it's how you bounce back that matters more. It's not going to maybe be like the short leash, the short pull off the stage.
Yeah, I mean, Bundy can talk to this too because he's been there and he's experienced it. I how many times have we talked to players who maybe were young players here and didn't get along with the coach or thought the coach was too hard on them or made their life miserable, and then they go somewhere else and they have some success, and then once they have that success, they look back on it and say, "Yeah, man, that coach was really the difference. I made me the player that I ended up becoming today. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's just the kind of coaching I needed at that time to kind of get me where I am." So maybe that, it's certainly possible that these guys, kind of buy into Tortorella a little bit, and instead of it being a negative where it's like, oh, he's pushing too hard, or oh, it's this, I don't get along with this coach. Maybe it's like, yeah, he's hard, yeah, he's tough, but yeah, he's fair, and this is how I'm going to play my best hockey. And I think that that's a possibility with a lot of these guys. If you look, through that lineup last night, and when they had so many guys, I know everybody wants to say under 25, and I think that's a kind of a misleading number, because if you come into the league at 18 or 19, you're a 7-year vet by the time you're 25. I think 23 is kind of a little bit better of a number to kind of gauge it at, because guys come in between 21 and 23. But anyway, when you look at that lineup, there's a lot of young players unheralded. I thought, we didn't even really talk. There's not a lot to talk about with guys like Tanner Luczinsky and Noah Cates. Noah Cates played the third most minutes of any forward last night. I think he was really good. And Tanner Luczinsky had a really good game as well. Was a little bit all over the place on the ice and making things happen. When you see that, and then you add in the Frost, the 2 goals for Frost, and Wade Allison gets the first goal of the season, and young players contributing and not looking out of place. I think that's a benefit for them, to have a coach who's going to be a little bit harder, because they'll respond, I think, within that structure, saying, you know what, we're able to succeed doing what this guy's asking us to do, and if that's going to keep us in the NHL, then we'll be willing to play that way.
Yeah, and I agree. As long as it's done fairly, right? If the guy gives you a chance, but he told you one thing and he treats the situation as fairly as he talked to you about it, then I'm all right with it.
Yeah.
I guess one good thing that we have to look forward to here, and I tweeted this last night, and some people got really upset about it, but it's like, you beat the Devils, and there are a lot of people who are over the moon about what a great win it was for the team, and are the Flyers actually better than everybody thought? And it's like, let's see where we're at in 2 weeks. But if there's one positive you can take out of this, it has to be, as you guys said, the young guys don't look out of place. And so as you kind of project forward, there might not be, an 85-point season in this team. But if they hold to form, if they implement this system well, if they follow the principles of the coaching, the coaches and the system, And even if the results aren't there, but they can keep their heads high, they're still producing goals, they're still, playing within their abilities. Maybe the season isn't as much of a waste or a wash as it felt. I mean, it could very well go down, and this could be like a 10-win team. This could be like a 15-win team. We don't know. It really depends on a lot of things. But if they hold form and they continue to find positives and stay confident, I don't know. Like maybe this season they build their confidence, they get these important reps at the NHL level. Maybe this isn't as long of a turnaround as we had previously thought. Maybe if you do end up with a solid pick this year, like maybe there is a path that some of these guys really do exceed expectations this year. It's not enough to make them a playoff team. I don't know. Like maybe this isn't as bad. I can't believe I'm saying it. Maybe it's not as bad as we thought. And is there reason for positivity here?
There's reason for positivity, Russ, but let's hold your horses. It's one game. I think you look.
I'm
look
capping
I look.
positivity
I just look
today, buddy. All about.
Well, no, but I look at
positivity.
that. No, but I'm looking at this. You look at this. Just look at what they got coming up. All right, Vancouver. I mean, can they beat Vancouver? Sure, they can beat Vancouver. But Vancouver's coming off blowing a 3-goal lead in their opener. Okay, and they're part of a 5-game road trip here. So they're going to come in here with a little butt hurt, and they're going to be a little bit pissed off. Okay, after the way that ended. So they're not going to be an easy task. Then you got to go on the road, and you got to play Tampa and Florida on back-to-back nights. One of those you're going to have to put Urson in. All right, rookie goalie who's never played in the NHL. He's going to get baptism by fire. And then they play. Is it Carolina that ends the trip before they come home? I forget who the last game is of the 3-game trip. But then they come home, and the schedule doesn't get much easier when you get here.
It's Nashville.
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 Yeah. Okay. But then they come home, and I think there's a couple of tough games at home after that, right?
San Jose, Florida, Carolina. Then they're back on
Carolina's
the road for Rangers, Maple Leafs. Then former captain Giroux. Like it becomes a murderer's row.
Yeah, but it starts to get tough. There's a couple of easier games in there, but for the most part, it's a tough road to hoe. If they come through this and they're somehow lingering around 500, getting through those 10, 12 games, then you sit there and say, yeah, there's some positives to really take out of this. Maybe they are a little bit better than we thought. But if not, that doesn't mean that there can't be positives along the way and the team still not have a good record.
There's one thing that I think we can probably hang on to here, and I think Bundy's the one who said it in the offseason. You bring in a new coach, especially one like Tortorella, who's going to put you through hell in training camp. It's entirely possible that they don't win these games, but they're very competitive through the first 10 because their conditioning far exceeds that of other teams, like especially those that, are top tier teams and maybe, don't take the conditioning as seriously at the very beginning of the year. Like maybe they do look competitive and then the wheels fall off. But hey, you know what, guys? I'm going to stick to the positivity here. I think it's nice to see the team go out and win. It's good to see people and Flyers fans who went out to that game to see them have a positive night. Because, truth be told, there haven't been that many positive nights the last few seasons, and it remains to be seen how many there will be this year. But it was nice. Like, there was something nice about that warm, fuzzy feeling you get, seeing people enjoy the return of hockey, and then let's see where the chips fall where they may. Anything else you guys wanted to touch on from the game?
No, it was a good win, except, the game, I have one more thing to say. ESPN Plus sucks. All right? I don't know what else you want me to say. It sucked. My screen kept going. That little thing kept spinning around and around and freezing. It was awful. Like, if you're going to have a streaming service, and I have Comcast. I have the regular, internet. It was awful. What an awful viewing experience. That's it.
You know what I use instead? Because I have the same issues with ESPN Plus, and I have gigabit speed internet, so there's no reason that I should have an issue. I end up going through the Hulu app. And you can link the two together. Now, I don't know if you have to have a Hulu membership. I did like the Disney bundle because I don't know. I'm an idiot. But I went through the Hulu app and I had no issues.
It's because you have 12 kids.
Yeah, that's right. A third of that. Well, a quarter of that. Soon to be a third of that. But anyway, I looked at it and I went, the ESPN Plus app, Same thing, Bundy. Kept crapping out. I switched over
Terrible.
to the Hulu app, and I had no issues. I don't know if it's an ESPN Plus not being able to, like, the server load. Like, I have no idea. But I have run into those same issues, and I'm as much of a techie as anybody else. And so I don't know why there were so many issues with even the quality. The video quality on
And if you make
Hulu
one
was
mistake with the
superior
remote,
to ESPN Plus.
you make one mistake with the remote too, you're booted off, and you got to go back in again and wait for it. It's awful.
Yep.
It's terrible. If you're gonna do something, do it right. Don't do it half speed. Like, you know, make sure it's working. I hate that. It's awful. Anyway, game 2 next.
I know.
That's it.
I know we have to go here. You've got to go run in and cover the Phillies, and I believe there's going to be something going on with you and Big Bet Bob Wankel over somewhere with the Phillies coverage. Probably going to do an episode of Crossed Up. You might do a live stream. All depends on when people listen to this show, if they can be cued off about that. But anyway, I think you and Bob are going to crush the Phillies coverage here. Let's hope that the Phillies win today. I'm going to the game on Saturday, taking the family, trying to make memories here with the kids while they're little. The tickets that I bought were $60 through the team right after they won against the Cardinals. And now those same seats on secondary market, same section, are going for over $200. I don't know how to feel about that. Do I sell them? I need advice, guys. Do I sell the tickets? Do I just tell the kids that's going to go towards other stuff? Or do I take them? I think I take them. Have to take them, right?
You take them. You take them, Russ. I mean, really, it's less than $1,000, right, that you're going to make. You take the kids. If they were going for $500 a ticket, I could think about it at that point, right? But $240.
It'll all depend on how tonight goes. Depends on how this afternoon's game goes. If they win, who knows how high those tickets are.
Yeah.
But before we go, Ant, we need to touch on this very briefly. You wrote an article yesterday, an amendment to the lawsuit filed by Jim McCrossan and Sal Rafa against the Flyers. Alleging berating interaction with Flyers head coach John Tortorella. You included in that story an email that went back and forth between Chuck Fletcher and Jim McCrossan. Honestly, kind of shocking, I think, to a lot of the public. I just wanted to kind of get from you real quick here, like, is this a thing that you think is going to, like, fundamentally change things? Like, is this something that, like, is just like another unforced error? Like, where do you kind of land on this one?
First, let me just make sure that we put this caveat out so that nobody gets sued. These are just allegations at this point. All right, everything that even what I've written is alleged. There is no confirmation.
It's in the headline.
That, yes, it's an allegation. Where do I think it goes? I think it becomes just another black mark on Comcast. That they would take these steps if, in fact, the allegations are true. That they would take these steps to make the Jim McCrossan's life miserable while he's there, just because he filed a lawsuit because he felt that they were negligent in designing the building that caused him to get cancer. It's a very petty approach if, in fact, these allegations
that he alleges caused cancer. Let's add alleges in there as well.
Yes.
He does have
cancer. He does have cancer.
He has cancer, but I'm saying,
he's alleging that he got it from the poor design of the building, which allowed the carcinogens to get into his system through the Zamboni tunnel, which is right next to the training room. So I think it's a black mark in that regard. What does it do further? I think it keeps the story out in the open. I think it keeps people aware of what's happening. I think people want to know more, and I think more will come out. I guess the real question that I have here is, how long does Comcast play the game of chicken with the law firm that's representing Jimmy and Sal? Because Klein Spector is the top law firm in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
They don't mess around. They're not going to just sit here and settle for something that's not what those gentlemen deserve. And so the question will be, does Comcast finally just say, enough bad publicity is enough bad publicity. Just do a settlement, pay them an exorbitant sum of money to cover their medical expenses, and just it's over with and it goes away. Or does Comcast dig in their heels and say that they want to fight this? Because I think if they do that, you're really looking at a really dramatic and unprecedented. Like I don't know. I think that there's a lot, because I think that there's a lot of people around the world who probably are keeping an eye on this because they maybe had similar situations in their experiences with Zambonis or hockey rinks, because it's not like it's just Voorhees skate
Zamboni
zone.
the machine, not the company. To be clear,
Yes.
we are legally protecting ourselves. We're not attacking the Zamboni company, the ice cutting, whatever the hell.
Ice cutting machines.
Continue, sorry.
Yes.
Just for the sake of it.
Yeah, it's not just Flyer Skate Zone and Voorhees that did this. There's barns all over the world that probably have had the same problem, and this is the first time it's really just coming to light. So I think it would be fascinating if it got to the trial phase. I'm still not convinced that it does. I think Comcast ultimately settles. I'm not sure why they've let it go on as long as they have. I'm not sure why they had, this amended complaint for 48 hours and weren't prepared to provide a better statement than they did yesterday. The one thing that I will say that really bothers me the most is, when the first, you remember, guys, when the first story came out, when we wrote it back in April, the response from the legal team for Comcast was that these claims were without merit.
Mm-hmm.
They amended this yesterday or 2 days ago and talked about Tortorella berating Jim McCrossan, that alleging that the company influenced the Flyers to mistreat him, to try and trick him, to do all these nefarious things. And they did not in any way deny it. They did not in any way say it was without merit this time. This would have been an opportunity. Like the first one was the one where they probably should have been a little bit more understanding of the situation.
Gentle.
Delicate.
Yeah.
And that this is the one where you come out and say it's without merit. The fact that they didn't say it was without merit tells me that they know it happened. And if you know it happened, and this went through human resources, which we know it did go through human resources, and nothing was done. There is a Comcast code of ethics that anybody who ever worked there, Bundy, I'm sure you had to sign it. I had to sign it when I worked there. When we all worked there, there is a Comcast code of ethics that you have to follow. And if they in fact are now admitting that they knew this took place and nothing was done about it, then something has to happen somewhere. Somebody along the chain of command has to lose a job for this. I don't know who you want to put it on. I don't know where. If you want to start at the top with we start at the top with Dave Scott, I would say, for Comcast Spectacor, not Comcast Corporate, and say somewhere along the chain from him on down to when it got to Tortorella, somebody knew that this was taking place and let it happen, or instructed for it to happen and let it happen. Assuming the allegations are correct, but they could have denied it yesterday and didn't. And that's where I sit there and say, wow, how do you not? If you're not denying it, why isn't something being done?
Yeah. Fascinating story Anthony put out. I mean, it really is. The thing with Jimmy too, I mean, you have to know Jimmy. I worked with him for so many years, as many guys have. I mean, he's got to be one of the most mild-mannered people you'd ever want to be around. Like, just as kind of person as you could ever imagine. Has the time for everybody, speaks in a very docile type of tone. There's not a lot of nastiness out of him. So I mean, again, it's just I found the story just absolutely incredible. Really,
and I'll say this too. One more thing, and this is why I was a little bit surprised with the whole Tortorella thing, because anyone that I've ever talked to in hockey who's been around John as a coach has had nothing but good things to say about him as a person, how he treats his people, his staff, and everything. It's always been good. Yes, we've seen the fiery John Tortorella in the media. We've seen him be tough on players. We've seen him scream his head off at referees. So we do know that it's Italian blood, right? Russ, we can talk about that. It's there. It comes out every once in a while. But that in general, the man is a good person who is good to his people. It surprises me that if this did happen, that he would do this to someone who he does not know upon the first couple times actually meeting him.
Yeah.
Like that's where it's like, there's a disconnect for me somewhere.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's almost weird. It's strange. And I mean,
my
like
read
I said,
on it is
two decent people involved by what the accounts we're hearing.
Yeah.
And it's just this very, very odd, fascinating kind of story.
If this thing happened that has been alleged and not denied by the team, just to be clear, if this did happen, it almost makes me feel like it's almost like somebody trying to ingratiate themselves to a new job, to like a new position, almost as if like, well, if we don't want this person in this role, or we don't want this person to do X, Y, Z, and nobody else is going to do it, well, then I guess I will. And I don't know if that's what happened. Again, these are all just like, we're just pondering here. We're just putting it. But like, if it's me, my thought would be the person who probably should have handled this would have been the guy in charge of hockey ops, because he would probably be the one, and especially because of the email, like, talking about changing roles, like one would assume that he would be the one. So I don't even know why the coach would be interacting with him in a way that could be alleged to be belittling. There's no reason for it. Why would you? He's moving into another role. He has nothing to do with your, on bench staff or whatever,
So here, go with me here for a second, Russ. So the thing is that the allegations, according to the complaint, are that Comcast Spectacor influenced the Flyers hockey operations department to treat Jim this way.
Okay.
So they're saying their allegation is that it was Spectacor people who dictated this. Okay. So again, that's Dave Scott and his group. If in fact that's the case, and again, these are all allegations, and it goes to Chuck Fletcher. Chuck Fletcher now has an option. Either he does what his boss tells him to do, which he doesn't want to do, or he pushes back a little bit and says, no, that's not how I operate my team. I don't want to do that to somebody. So the fact then, what ends up happening is, because if it came from Dave's group and it got to Tortorella, there had to be messengers along the way. It didn't. Dave Scott didn't call John Tortorella into a meeting and say, "Go yell at Jim McCrossin." That didn't happen. Okay, so there were people along the way who
whispered down the lane.
Whispered down the lane, exactly. Passed it along, and it worries me that they would keep passing it along. They would keep passing the buck rather than someone saying, "Wait a minute, is this the right thing to do to this man?" Even if Chuck felt, and we all read his email, and it was in the story. Even if Chuck felt that Jim McCrossin was responsible for the injuries of the last several years, which you could argue is a ridiculous statement, since athletic trainers only treat injuries. They don't train players. They don't clear players. So it's ridiculous in and of itself. But even if Chuck's naive enough to believe that and put it on Jim McCrossin, that's fine. That doesn't mean you don't have a human relationship with the man. And it doesn't mean that you don't look at it and say, do we really want to bully a guy? Is that what we're being asked to do? At some point, you have to stand up and say no. But nobody did. And it gets to Tortorella, who's the bottom of the chain, I would assume. I mean, unless Tortorella is going to pass it off to somebody else, but who the hell else can you pass it off to when you're the coach? And it's like, all right, and he did it. So like, I'm surprised by so many people accepting this, and then the coach doing it. Like all through every step surprises me, because I think that there could have been probably 5 or 6 people along the way who could have said, "Wait a second, is this what we? Hello, guys, let's pump the brakes. Is this what we really want to do?" And no one did that. Not one person did that, and that's where I'm lost.
Unless the coach went rogue. It's the only. But then if that's the case,
a rogue agent, Russ.
Yeah, what I'm saying. But like, if the coach went rogue, then like one would also assume that there probably would have been some kind of disciplinary thing, because like conceptually, especially if you're the Flyers, if you're Spectacor, you go, holy shit, dude, you just put us in a legal quagmire. Like you just made this worse, dude. Like, sorry about you, but we got to figure something out here. All right, I feel like we probably touched on this about as well as we can.
Yeah, one more thing
again,
go
ahead, buddy.
Russ, real quick.
Yeah.
2 weeks, boys. It's coming out. There it is.
Oh yes.
So I got to get you guys a couple copies.
Wrong one. There we go.
I've actually kind of reread it. I did it like a cleanup read when we had to send before the printers, but it comes out Road to Redemption. It's a great story, guys. In many ways, I had a chance to reread it again. A lot of chapters this week. What's good with it is it really kind of tells the story, a little bit of the story from my side and maybe some others of the 90s teams and the early 2000s, but also my plight against addiction and alcohol, the struggles I had and coming out the other end. So what started off as very much a hockey book, I think became a personal venture story and really, truly one of redemption. So looking forward to it. October 25th. As I said to people on Facebook and other social medias, I have 300 books. I will be selling and getting these copies off, signed copies if you want one, and I will mail them back to you guys, and I'll provide methods of payment as well.
So you know what else? You know what else, Bundy?
Yeah.
Do you have it as an audio book for people like Russ?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Russ just. It's actually funny. One of my Ice Warriors, actually the guy, and he'll hear this. Dean Mayrand, who won the first Ice Wars in 2006. He's one of our judges now, and he says, "Hey Bundy, I love one of your books." He goes, "I definitely want to have it," and he goes, "But you have it in an audio book." And he says next in parentheses, "Yes, I can read." He goes, "I drive a lot, so I prefer the audio book," and I'm sure that applies to Russ as well. Yes, Russ, it's coming in an audio book, and apparently the guy that got doing it's been pretty prevalent before, doing a lot of these, so people will be familiar with his voice.
Great.
As the person who speaks the most languages on this podcast, I am offended that Sanfilippo would call me illiterate. Okay, I
wasn't calling you illiterate. No, that was not a mention to call you illiterate. No, and you know what that is? It's a generational thing, because people like me, we read books. We hold the book in our hands. We read it. Your generation likes the Kindle. Your generation likes the audio book.
No, buddy. No. Your generation likes the Kindle.
You want somebody to read it to you.
With the extra big letters.
You're a soft snowflake.
Yeah, I'm sorry that, listen, my generation's gotten saddled. Hold on. Well, my generation's gotten saddled with crippling student loan debt, a recession, maybe 2, freaking COVID, a lot of shit. Okay, if we
you know what else, Bundy?
Trauma, we just want somebody to read us a bedtime story, you can make an audiobook.
Yes,
I'll read the
book. He'll listen to it. He'll listen to it on 2. He'll listen to it on 2 times speed.
Smallest violin right now.
Yeah. 2 times speed too, right, Russ?
Yeah.
2.5. 2.5.
2.5. 2.5 times. Have you ever tried that, Bundy? Have you ever tried listening to somebody speak at 2.5 times speed on a podcast or something?
No.
You can change. Like, you can listen to our show if you wanted to on 2.5 times speed, so 2.5 times faster than we actually talk. It's completely I can't.
Unintelligible is what you're going to say?
Unintelligible. Yes, it's I was going to say illegible, but that would be writing. It's completely unintelligible, and I don't know how Russ does it, but Russ listens to shows on 2.5 times speed.
I will say that this show is hard to listen to on 2.5 times speed. It is. We sometimes talk quickly.
Russ,
I talk pretty
Can I
quickly.
admit something to you really quick? I watch Netflix shows on 1.5 speed sometimes.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
Do you really?
I
Really?
do. Yeah.
I can't imagine cutting corners on a TV show.
No, some of them. I mean, some of them are just like I watched this Polish show the other day on the water rising into town. It was pretty good, but I had the 1.5 that baby.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Watching
Interesting.
a Polish show about
What about? I mean, since we're admitting things
right now, it's called High Water. It's a Netflix like top 10 right now. I watched all 6 episodes on 1.5 speed.
Since we're admitting things, does anybody watch it with captions on? I do. I watch with captions. Almost
TV
everything.
shows?
Everything.
Oh, yeah,
Almost
for sure.
Unless it's live. I don't watch it live.
It's good for your head too. Keeps your brain moving and everything with captions. I watch captions with everything.
Yeah.
I get
The only
distracted
time
by that, which is a
the only
problem.
time I won't use captions is if it's live or if it's dubbed.
Oh, yeah, that is a real thing. By the way,
Yeah.
that you guys might notice this sometimes. It doesn't happen as much on Netflix in English, but like sometimes the captions don't line up with the exact words that are being said on screen.
Right. Drives me nuts.
I will tell you, watching a show in Spanish or in German, but especially Spanish, the captions are so far off from what the Spanish audio is, like massively different. So, good for you guys. You don't speak Spanish,
Spanish
but for
is actually
you know.
on thing. You actually look like a Spanish bartender in a Hemingway novel right now somewhere, Russ.
Gracias, señor. Gracias.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end this show. Listen, we brought positivity, and I'm going to promise people from now on, okay? Well, at least this week, maybe next week. We are going to bring positivity to this podcast feed. We are going to break down these games. We're going to cover the stories off the ice. But, as Bundy said off the top of the show, the goal has always been, even since Bundy's come on, is to talk about the team. And we're going to break down this damn team, all right? Come hell or high water, we're going to give the best analysis on this team, on the on-ice product. Are we going to venture off into some of the other things? Yes, because they are worth discussing. But the primary focus of the show, pretty much since its inception, has been to talk about this team, and we will do that. Anthony, I saw you put your hand up as you get ready to go into a Phillies game. What did you have to say?
I didn't put my hand out. I was putting something away in my bag.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
I agree with you. Positivity, as long as there's something positive to talk about.
We're gonna try.
They go on a 10-game losing streak. We ain't finding much positive to talk about.
Unless the young guys are still performing well and the results just aren't there. We'll see. You know what we didn't even mention, guys, and we're gonna leave. Carter Hart had a pretty solid game, and there were plenty of numbers and stats that we could have thrown at people to show that like maybe last night wasn't sustainable over a long period. But Carter Hart, we have to give him a shout, had a really solid game. And if there are two things that could stop this team from being a bottom 5 team, it's fear of John Tortorella and Carter Hart's play in net. We'll see how it goes. Until next week, or until some other story breaks, this has been Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Snow the Goalie, Instagram at Snow the Goalie, Facebook.com/Snow the Goalie. You can watch all the episodes of this podcast on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel. There is a playlist set up specifically for Snow the Goalie. You can bookmark that. You can go to snowthegoalie.com to find all this stuff. You can follow Bundy on Twitter at CTarian6 and on Twitter at AnsanPhilly as he brings the camera close to his face.
I'm getting ready to get out of the car, damn it.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week here on Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast.